Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we have our very important debate. This debate actually it's become very popular from World Talent Economy Forum, and most important thing is that with a lot of universities we collaborate, including Oxford Union, Cambridge Union, as well as Harvard Debating Union, even in Malaysia International Islamic Universities, University of Malaya, and many famous university actually supporting our debating uh, skills. And side by side, we have our world famous speakers, and definitely in the future we want to arrange a debate in between AI and human, and definitely our speakers gonna attend in the debate. So for today's debate, our topic is this house believes that the internet needs to be regulated. From the government side, we have our Honorable Prime Minister of the Parliament, Professor David Smith. We have our ministers for ICT, Information and Communication Technology, Mr. Marshall. We have government parliament members, Professor Donald. On the other hand, from the opposition side, opposition time side, actually we have Professor Rob. He is a leader of the oppositions. On the other hand, deputy leader of the oppositions is Mr. Adam. Uh, uh, Dr. Talib, he said he gonna joins for the opposition side. If he cannot join, actually Professor Rob actually take the lead for the closing remarks and the third speaker's speech. And I'm sure this session will be very interesting and very helpful for around the world. So I want to give chance our Honorable Prime Minister of the Parliament, Professor David Smith.
Well, thank you. And members of Parliament, other ministers, the citizens, thank you for being part of this debate today as we look at a tool that has become indispensable to our country and our place in the world. Our position is that under our government, under our constitution, under our systems put in place, that yes, we should regulate the internet. The internet should be regulated just like our telecommunications are, just like television, just like many of our industries where we're providing services to the vast number of citizens. You know, one of the things we should look at is things like our children should not be able to have access to free porn. People should not be able to ruin someone else's life or career with posting and articles. People should not have access to all your private information. Cyberbullying has reached an academic portion in our country, all because of a internet access policy that is left over from the days when the internet was just an experiment and we began to put it in place, where today it has become a part of life that we just cannot go without. It's one of the drivers of commerce. It's a driver of our education. It's becoming a driver of our government and our form of government. Can you imagine us moving our elections to be done 100% over the internet without some form of regulations to do it? You know, some people seem to think regulation of the internet violates some principle of freedom, like free speech. Well, you know, when you have courts that equates other things together with this, you have to understand the position, and it's wrong. The government is in the business of protecting the basic unit of society, the family. It's in the business of protecting our basic units of our economy, our businesses, and how they are done. You know, and television and movies, for example, were regulated for content with good reasons. Look at what we have now without some of that oversight and how we're seeing that impact upon you, our citizens. We forget that freedom requires responsible behavior. We confuse liberty with license, thinking that freedom means you can do anything you want. You can walk down the street and take things from anyone else because it's your freedom. You can begin to publish anything you want to. You can incite anything you want to. You can destroy people's lives over this now dominant communications vehicle called the internet. And our society just needs to be, you know, if you want a healthy society, The regulation of this is very important. One of the fundamental purposes of our government is to regulate the behavior of society to ensure domestic order. That's why we have laws. That's why we have regulations. That's why we put in place things to protect our civil society. People will do anything they think they can get away with and more. One of the fundamental purposes of our government, again, is to regulate the behavior of society to ensure domestic order. The internet is a conduit touching all levels of society. And when that conduit uh, puts out chaos, barbarism, things that go against the very core of our society, then eventually society will reflect that. You can see it already when you look at it. And now we have more access to information than we've had in the entire history of mankind before the internet. The data is doubling every 2 years. Yet we're also more ignorant. We're functionally illiterate more than ever before. And we do nothing with all that knowledge except put it in that content in places where it hurts our children, where it hurts other individuals in it. The way we have to look at the legitimate authority of government to help protect our citizens is vitally important at this point. Yes, there's places where there's abuses, but that is why regulation is necessary, is to prevent those abuses and to put them in place. Also, we are seeing that where we have done this in other industries, where we have guaranteed um, competition, it has resulted in lower prices. Where we have put regulations in place to make the access to time. There's something called net neutrality, where, for example, if you get your internet from a cable company without regulation, they can be able to block your streaming services so that you would have to buy their programming instead of access this other information over the internet now. We need to look at the places where the internet has been used poorly, where terrorism has come there, where weapons, drugs, the porn, hate groups, they're all enabled by a non-regulated internet. And that is one of the goals why we believe that it's our responsibility to put in place. Limit it now before it's too late. Put regulations in place before it's too late. Laws need to be put in place to protect our children, the irresponsible, the ignorant, and those who want to destroy our life, our country, and our position in the world. You know, where you see this and where many advocates of free speech fail to see it is information, knowledge, and data oftentimes communicates misinformation out. We can twist it. We can begin to see things that are there. Would it be right to see porn show up in our elementary schools, in our kids like that? Do people who advocate the internet should not be regulated feel that this is acceptable? And is an invariable part of the unregulated internet access? You know, parents can regulate their children's online activity only while they're home. But with the amount of free Wi-Fi we have now as our country has developed, the proliferation of smartphones and devices to our children when they're out of touch, we should be able to put rules and regulations in place to handle that. You see it all the time. Should the government regulate the net? Of course they should. Who else should we trust to do this job? Who else has the ability to do this nationwide? Yes, I can police my own internet in my house, but I cannot routinely choose my access to it, the people, just like we regulate our telecommunications industry, just like we regulate our movies, just like we regulate the other things in our country. And we've done it so successfully. We should now extend that same thought and that same regulation to the internet because it is vitally critical for us to be able to do that. So, Prime Minister, thank you for my capabilities.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, for this Parliament, Professor David Smith. Now I want to give chance our opposition leader, very powerful speakers and very dynamic leaders. Hopefully, not only this mock Parliament, all of our speakers they will perform in the real Parliament. Professor Rob.
Well, first I want to point out that David Smith is the Prime Minister, but so he was thanking himself a minute ago. Porn. We certainly heard the Prime Minister talk about all the evils of the internet and porn. One would think he's probably a little too focused on that one aspect, but who's to tell? Who does regulation well? He talked about the fact that we need to keep people we don't trust off the internet. We need to protect our positions of power, but that does work for the party that's in power, not for the rest of us. Look at China and Russia. They do an excellent job of regulating the internet. And what they do is they prevent anybody from speaking out against the governments of China and Russia. Clearly, that works for the party in power. It doesn't work for the rest of us, and no party is always a majority. What regulating the internet does is it compromises our ability to tell a story. He mentioned that we should regulate it like we regulate TV, but do we really regulate television that hard? Do we prevent, for instance, foreign entities from owning television networks or news providers? We used to. Maybe we should again. But that's not regulating the internet. That's just making sure that foreign interests don't influence our government. He mentioned again that the children should not have free access to porn. Okay, fair enough. But then maybe strengthen the laws on pornography and help parents regulate their children's behavior. We're not in the business of regulating how children behave at home. I guess we could. Maybe the Prime Minister needs somebody to regulate how his children behave. I do not. I'm perfectly capable of providing the parenting that's needed for my children, and I wouldn't for a moment suggest that any government, ours or anybody else's, should have absolute control of what my children see or hear. Look at some of the stuff that's going on in the United States at the moment. The United States is regulating against books that talk about the Holocaust. They're regulating against books that talk about their history with regard to discrimination and abuse. They're regulating speech on a broad basis and in an unprecedented area for a country that has been known for freedom of speech and being able to share ideas. That's the problem with governments regulating communications. There's a very thin line between doing what's right and doing what's very, very wrong. He suggested that people shouldn't have access to your private information. That's true, but perhaps the path is to educate our populace into not sharing that information in the first place. To punish an internet provider for our citizens doing stupid things seems to be incredibly foolish. Perhaps it would be better to put in place educational programs so that kids understood the risks they were taking by sharing such information. And then it doesn't matter if they're sharing it over the internet or they're sharing it over some other future communications process. It doesn't matter if they're sharing it over letters or sharing it over the web. They learn to not do the stupid thing rather than government saying or stepping in and trying to regulate directly their behavior through a third party. And look at the internet providers. They're largely foreign companies. Maybe that's an issue. Maybe we should be promoting domestic competitors in order for our citizens to be able to choose the internet information that they get and do so more intelligently. You have to understand that whenever you decide to regulate something, it becomes a serious problem. I have 10 reasons why we shouldn't regulate the internet. First is to protect our freedom of speech. Our ability to speak out against the harsh realities of the world is very important. It keeps our government from misacting. It helps us define criminals. It helps us prevent the very behavior that rises despots up and turns us from a democracy into a dictatorship. The freedom encourages entrepreneurial activity. We are at a disadvantage right now against the developed nations. We shouldn't be restricting our people and their ability to make money. We should be assisting them. Yes, that ability to make money needs to be legal. It needs to not take advantage. And I am as disgusted as undoubtedly the Prime Minister is about the number of ads that are fraudulent, that take advantage of our citizens on the internet. But that fraudulent activity isn't new activity. It's just using a new medium. Our activities against fraudsters and our rules and laws against fraudsters exist on the books today. We just need to enforce them and perhaps use the internet to help citizens report this activity so that enforcement can be more timely. Free internet facilitates innovation. It allows people to collaborate freely on different ideas and compete globally with much larger players. In fact, right now, our colleges and other education institutions regularly communicate via the internet with their counterparts overseas, and that helps our education institutions, and it helps our students become much more competitive. If we step in and start looking at that hard and regulating it, perhaps then we start blocking some of that innovation, some of that collaboration, some of that capability. We're behind, we're not ahead. And what the Prime Minister is suggesting would make us even more behind. The complications of regulating legitimate sites become an issue. We're putting in place rules, but those rules would be applied equally across legitimate and illegitimate sites, making the legitimate sites suffer through compliance as much as the illegitimate sites. We should be focusing on illegal behavior regardless of the medium, but not put brakes in place, friction in place against our own companies that are doing the legal and right thing. We need to maintain the citizens' right to privacy. There I agree with David Smith, but part of that privacy is keeping the government out of what it is they're doing. If people need to be able to converse about difficult subjects without us stepping in and saying they can't, and the issue isn't the fact that I don't agree there's a lot of fake news out there. What I don't agree with is that the government has a place in deciding which news is fake and which news is not. It would be very easy for the government to step in and say anything that my party says is fake, it's false, we're not telling the truth, that the government in power is doing a great job and nobody should complain. We could become China and do exactly that, in which case the Prime Minister would always be in power and we wouldn't have to bother with elections because who would want to vote for anybody else? They would control the communication medium. The idea of protecting against offensive behavior, but offensive is arbitrary. What's offensive to David Smith may not be offensive to me, may not be offensive to you. It may be offensive to David Smith that we talk about transgender issues. It may be offensive to David Smith that we talk about the rights of minorities. It may be offensive to me that we talk about certain things that are out there. Neither one of us should have the power to decide arbitrarily what's offensive and what gets blocked. As soon as we do that, we go from a democracy to being on a dictatorship or a more hostile form of government. Protecting educational value of the web. David Smith is right. There's a lot of information out there, a massive amount of information, and it's wonderful. And as we do that, clearly people are misusing that information, and a lot of that information is not viable or incorrect. But the government isn't in a position to make those decisions. The people that are in a position to make those decisions. And yes, I will grant you that our education institution needs help, that our people need to be able to do more deep thinking, be able to do critical thinking about the things that they choose. We have let our citizens down by not funding education well enough, but we don't fix that by limiting their access to information. We fix that by educating them on what kinds of information to look for, how to determine whether something's true or false, allow them to make their own decisions. We shouldn't be stepping in and making those decisions for them. Government spending, we aren't doing a good job enforcing the laws we have on the books today. If we're going to regulate the internet and do it right, it would require another law enforcement entity or significant funding increases for the law enforcement entities we have today. We don't have the money. We don't have the money to enforce the laws we have on the books now, let alone a whole raft of new laws, which would mean that enforcement would become arbitrary and capricious. It would put enforcement in the hands of those that want to corrupt the internet for their own uses. And that's something that governments do regularly, but once again, pointing to Russia and China as examples of how those kinds of powers can be abused. It could fan the flames of civil unrest. Remember what happened in Egypt when Egypt turned off the internet to prevent unrest. It made it worse. They effectively had a revolution. That we don't want that to happen here. If we restrict people's ability to talk, they'll find a way to communicate. And part of what they'll be communicating is anti-government information. And suddenly the very insurrection we want to stop, we will have fueled. We can't prevent people's right to find the information they need. And then finally, savvy hackers are going to defeat the system anyway. We haven't been able to prevent government institutions from being hacked and from having malware installed and from having ransomware installed. Even our police institutions are being attacked by ransomware and malware. Our governments on a regular basis is attacked. We need to protect against foreign attackers. We need to find a way to go after the hackers and the people that are doing our government damage, regardless of where they are. That's not regulating the internet. That's going after criminals, and we can't do it today. Putting more responsibility onto a system that currently isn't functioning properly is not the way to go. It just makes it work worse. At the end, this idea of regulating the internet is simply a power grab by the party in power to assure that they remain in power. We need our freedoms. We need the ability to speak. We need the ability to share information. If any party, my party or David's party, does this, it is simply an effort to take power away from the people and assure we are never voted out of office. And I think that's wrong. That's not what we stand for as a government. It's not what we stand for as a nation. The opposition rests.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rao, for your excellent debate. Now I request for today's debate, our Honorable Minister of Information and Communication Technology for this BOC Parliament, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Sharif, and thank you, fellow members of the Parliament and citizens that are watching this debate. The Honorable Opposition, Rob, has pointed out several things that we have to take issue with and bring to the table, because everything is can't, no, can't be done, threats to our liberties, and that is understandable. But I suspect it sounds to me more like a projection on us rather than what it's really about. Because if we're not suggesting that we limit people's freedoms, that's what he's claiming. On the contrary, we're here to protect the freedoms. That's what laws are about. Laws if you're in a democracy, the law is designed to protect the freedoms of others, and at the cost of being threatened by special interest groups and others like that. It sounds to me more like Rob's discussion points are more about what can't be done than what can be done. Our party is proposing a set of laws that are even better than what is being proposed right now under the Freedom of Internet Act that is being proposed through Reddit. Reddit has already put out the ability to stop Online Piracy Act, and they're stopping the Protect the IP Act, which goes against copyrights and things like that. I think it's a very convoluted subject matter that we're talking about, and simplifying it the way the Honorable Opposition has actually done a disservice to the discussion. It's a very complex subject matter. One of the things that our Prime Minister pointed out is the threat of internet porn, criminal activity. That's what we're trying to regulate, that kind of activity, and not take people's freedoms away. And posing it the way the opposition has makes it sound like that we are going to become a dictatorship. That is all. It's actually the contrary to that. We're here to protect our freedoms, not take away our freedoms. And in order to do that, you need regulations. If we follow the Honorable Opposition's logic all the way through, then technically we need no laws. We need no regulations, and we'll allow people to do whatever the hell they want. And then, excuse my French, and then we'll be in a position where we will have total chaos. So the internet is a place of human activity, and anywhere there's human activity, there needs to be laws. Do we want to become like a dictatorship that he's mentioned? The dictatorships he's mentioned? No, absolutely not. That's not our purpose or our goal. Our goal is to create a regulated atmosphere that allows people to have freedom of expression, protect copyright. I notice he's not there to protect the copyright. Copyright laws are fundamental to freedom of thought and freedom of expression. By the same token, Reddit is getting rid of the stop IP laws. we're not suggesting any of that. What we're suggesting is a set of laws that allow us to regulate, just like any other regulation, human activity that could be harmful to our democracy and to our country and to our economy. And the honorable opposition has indicated that there's a threat to our economy. On the contrary, it's a threat to our economy if we don't regulate it. Because if you don't allow regulation, proper regulation, obviously, then what happens is you have a situation where it's a Wild West, as they have out back in the 1880s in the United States, where every gunslinger can come out and shoot somebody. So if that's what you're proposing, honorable opposition, we're not for that. We are for regulation that doesn't take away freedoms, but that has the opportunity to protect people. Now, another item that the honorable opposition pointed out is we can't even enforce the laws that we make. So that's an excuse not to make laws. So therefore, there should be no laws because we can't enforce them. So you can't enforce traffic laws? Don't wear seatbelts. Get killed in an auto accident. Don't have airbags deployed in cars. That's your logic. That's not the logic of the government. The government's logic is to create laws that make sense, and we welcome them to participate in the crafting of the laws, the opposition, so that we get a law that everybody can optimize the situation. You're not going to maximize it. No law is going to protect everybody. And in one area, I do agree with the opposition, is that if we go willy-nilly into this, yeah, we'll end up having laws that will take away other people's freedoms. That's not the rule of law. That's not rule of law. That's the rule of dictatorship. So the fact that Rob is indicating that we might become a dictatorship, to me, again, sounds more like a projection of what he may be hoping for than what really is occurring. So I take umbrage with what he's saying, and I forcefully ask the opposition to join us in formulating a law that protects people and not get rid of people or impose restrictions on people. By the way, again, I'm going back to the traffic laws. If you're driving down the road and you don't wear a seatbelt, does that mean you're allowed to not do that? No, there are laws against that. You get ticketed for that. You can end up in courts. That's why we, as a democracy, honorable opposition, have courts. Courts of law ultimately determine what the process is. And you may not like the fact that courts do that, but that's the role of a tripartite government, which we are a part of. So it's not just the legislature doing its role. It has to write the laws, but law enforcement and different agencies have to enforce that law. That's the role of government. And then the judges in our court system, which is independent, actually comes in and adjudicates that. And some people will be found guilty and some people will be found not guilty. So I rest the case from our point of view of the opposition for what they proposed.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of this Parliament. Now I request our opposition whip, deputy leaders, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Well, I think a nice little aphorism that can neatly sum up our position is information wants to be free, which I believe has its roots in William Gibson era cyberpunk, and I think the philosophy can be traced back before that in the first pioneering waves of hacker culture and the hybrid of late 60s psychedelia with the roots of the Silicon Valley utopianism. And as someone who is part of one of the very first generations of people to grow up with the internet and internet use, I have first-hand experience with its benefits in terms of knowledge, information, data, answers. I have been very lucky. You find it in mysticism, folklore, shamanism, the trope of the oracle, custodians of sacred knowledge, and home computing, with all this knowledge at our fingertips, is the realization of that dream. Our prayers are being answered by godlike entities like Google and other search engines, and I cannot imagine my life without some of the new knowledge and synthesis of knowledge that the internet has granted me and people like me and many other young people since. We all know of the regulations and censorship impositions on certain channels in recent months and in recent years, and I remember how it was starting from the late 90s through the noughties up until the mid 2010s, until the last couple of years, of course. And it was a glorious fountain of knowledge to almost I remember the Wild West comparison was used negatively before, but I think I see that as a positive, or the Wild West levels of utopian freedom. And freedom fundamentally is what we are fighting to safeguard, really. And please don't misunderstand me. I do not support internet pornography. I do not support the business, the market, its production, its consumption, its accessibility, none of it. People of my generation have first-hand experience with what is an unfortunate addiction. It is a horrible addiction to what is effectively a digital drug that is robbing millions of young men and women on both sides of the screen, consumers and performers, of fulfilling sexual lives in the real world. However, the freedom of information and accessibility to information is what helped people with that addiction to come out of it, and that information about how to heal from it, what is happening in terms of neurochemistry, physiology, psychology, endocrinology, which made it a less mysterious and daunting task to heal. And there are accounts of people healing from this, and they are able to enjoy real life relations and romantic interactions again. And it's a similar case for people who fall victim to drug addictions as well. The information that they find in communities like Reddit and message boards are kind of like creating a lifeline for these people to feel less alone. So the internet was the problem primarily, but it also provided a solution, many solutions. And I and many others, young people, I'm grateful for the richer life experiences that both the problem and the solution provided for me, and the internet helped me move past and integrate into my life for the better. And I must concur with my colleague, Professor Rob, that the issues mentioned today are a problem in terms of crime and legislation and society, rather than the internet itself. Illegal activity is illegal activity before, during, and after the internet. And I also concur that offense is just part of being human, I'm afraid. Having the freedom to both offend and be offended is one of the prices we pay for being free people. Offensiveness should not be regulated. It should not be even factored into any decisions made about legislation. If you are offended, that's not my problem, it's yours. And why should I or anyone else care if you are offended or not? I'm not defending being a horrible person, but offensiveness going both directions as the victim or as the perpetrator is part of being free humans. We all need to grow a thicker skin sometimes. It's one of the rites of passage that we go through growing up. So, what offends me or one day might not offend me further down the line. And furthermore, as has been pointed out, what is prohibited simply goes underground to be exploited by the black market groups and people with unsavory interests. It happened with alcohol and the speakeasies during the Great Depression. It's been happening for decades, since the 60s before, until present day with the war on drugs. So, yes, I'll rest my case there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually waiting for our parliament member from the government side. But Honorable Prime Ministers, if you want...
I think I scared off the opposition member.
Yes. Yes. So, if Honorable Prime Minister, like if you want to take the lead, you can. In that situation, your closing remarks will be done by Mr. Donald.
Sure.
Closing remarks.
Be more than happy to do that. The debate has been very interesting so far. And it's a debate on whether government's role is to protect its citizens or government's role is to provide a Wild West. And as we look at studies that have been done, statistics from globally, it's really clear that government's role is to help protect the citizens, to help protect the economy and what we have. You know, we have never said that we are taking away people's rights to an opinion, the rights to express it. You do have it to express it. And we should enable that to happen. But as you look at it, it's our job to help regulate what is there, just like we've regulated the telecommunications industry, the television industry in its infancy, the ability to go and put industries around schools. We've established safe zones around schools. We've done the same as you've looked at. We begin to put regulations in place to protect child trafficking, and that is enabled by a free and open internet, and we've seen that in many studies. To me, what we're saying is that the internet itself is like our utility model, and the internet has become a tool that's just like utility, moving electricity, moving gas, moving other supplies like that, just like our telecommunications industry is a utility. And it's reached the point in its maturity where it's become so critical to our application, but so widely misused. The terrorist has become one of the major ways they radicalize people. It's become a major way to move illicit funds around our country and around globally. That it's our responsibility to take some action there. But let me say that in a totally different way. We know from looking globally that the last election in the United States had tremendous misinformation. We've seen that debated endlessly there. And we saw the impact of organizations like Meta and Facebook had on that. Let me conclude what we are saying as the government. Let me read you a quote from the CEO of Facebook that he published. Technology is a major part of our lives, and companies such as Facebook have immense responsibility. Every day we make decisions about what speech is harmful, what constitutes political advertising and misadvertising, how to prevent sophisticated cyber attacks. These are important for keeping our community safe. But if we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't ask companies to make decisions and judgments like this alone. And I want to emphasize this. This is from the CEO of Facebook. I believe we need a more active role for governments and regulators. By updating the rules for the internet, we can preserve what's best about it, the freedom for people to express themselves, for entrepreneurs to build new things, while also protecting society from broader harm. From what I've learned, and this again is the CEO of Facebook, that we need to put new regulation in place to protect harmful content, election integrity, privacy, data portability, and its impact upon the citizens. My fellow legislative members, parliament members, and citizens, if as Facebook was accused as being one of the largest contributors to misinformation, putting people at risk during part of it, to hear their CEO come back and say, gee, guys, the times have changed, that it's time that we put regulation in place, that we put laws in place to handle this. When you see the person who is accused of being one of the most abusive come back and say, guys, it's time to put regulation in place, I believe it is the only responsible thing that we can do as a government in exercising our prime directives that we have as a government of protecting the citizens, of protecting the country and things. It's our obligation to do this, not just a requirement, but it's the obligation we have as the leadership of the nation to go ahead and put these things in place. So that is why I believe our position with the government is appropriate, not to limit free speech, but provide the safeguards to protect our companies, our citizens, our children, and more importantly, even the government that we live under with its threats from being disruptive. So that is my case for why we need having the internet regulated.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Already, Professor Donald, you joins, and I believe you can attend in the closing remarks for the government. Honorable Prime Minister, actually play your role.
Yeah.
Closing remarks, you can join.
every once in a while I get this overclocking error that crashes my computer. So
Understand. Thank you.
anyway, when
Professor Donald, Professor
yeah,
Donald, like after Professor Rob, you will get the chance. After
okay,
Professor Rob, according to the law of this parliament.
of
Uh,
course.
yes. Professor Rob, what is your speech as a third speaker, as well as the closing remarks from the opposition side?
So okay, this is my third position, or I'm doing closing.
Third and closing.
So this will be closing. Okay, so third and
Yes.
closing. Well, so I'll just take the time and free flow. Okay. Marshall made an interesting argument, but it's often an argument made by those in power that things are binary. Either you do what I suggest you do, or the world will go crazy. People raise up their hands and run down the street. We'll have criminals all over the place. But recognize the internet's in place now. We're not out of control now. Yes, there are problems, and one of the big problems is we're not enforcing the laws we currently have on the books. Clearly pointed out that copyright laws are being violated. Well, we have copyright laws. Let's just enforce them, and I believe we are enforcing them. But the issue is we're spread so very thinly. We're not doing a good job of it, as he rightly points out. My argument is why not put our efforts in enforcing the laws we have on the books now? Why don't we make what we have now work at scale without putting in place another set of laws that we simply won't use effectively? He mentioned that if we don't regulate, there's a threat to the economy, that it's a wild west, that every gunslinger can shoot someone. Well, we have laws against people shooting people. We have laws of libel and slander that are in place. Just use them. He argued that we need to make laws that make sense. How do you argue against that? Yeah, we need to create laws that make sense, but perhaps we should look at the laws that we have and pick out the ones that aren't being enforced and start enforcing them. He argued, interesting enough, that laws don't take away freedoms, but that's exactly what laws do. Laws take away freedoms. He used seatbelts as an example. If you might recall, when seatbelts were proposed and mandated, we had people rebel against seatbelts. And we're seeing the same thing happen with vaccines. We've mandated vaccines. What's happened? People are fighting the mandates. Instead of educating people in terms of making constructive and critical decisions with regard to vaccines, we failed on our job to make sure our populace is educated. So then we tried to mandate it. And did that make things better? Or did that, in fact, make things worse? Now we've got large groups getting together in our streets demonstrating against vaccines. I agree, that's friggin' insane. But the mandates drove that behavior. They didn't mitigate it. And the mandates were needed because we didn't do our job. The people in power did not do their job in terms of educating the people and promoting the vaccines as something they wanted to do. Going back to seatbelts, if we'd simply done a good job of selling why you wear seatbelts to keep your family safe, maybe we wouldn't have had to mandate them. Now, I'm not suggesting we pull seatbelt mandates. I'm just suggesting that in the past, these things just haven't worked that well. They build up opposition. And the issue here is what we're talking about regulating is language. We're talking about regulating how people communicate with each other. We're going to say what things they can say and what things they can't. And as we know, when governments do that, you have a real problem with overreach. Because as I said, what David Smith party thinks is acceptable language and what I think is acceptable language might be two different things. Or what David Smith thinks is acceptable language and what his wife thinks is acceptable language might be two different things. I know that's that way in my family. But should either one of us have the final say in what the other one has to say? It doesn't work in my family, and it probably wouldn't work in his either. The thing is when you're regulating language, it's a slippery slope. Where do you draw the line? And if you're not able to draw the line without the internet, then how are you able to draw the line more successfully with the internet? How can you do a job you're not doing well in regular media and communication and suddenly do it at scale when you need to? It's not magic here. If you can't do a job, you can't do a job. It's not a case that you can't do a job one place and then suddenly you change the mechanism. And and now you're capable and you're acting in behalf of the citizens. Both Marshall and David argued that we needed to do this to prevent against things like child trafficking. Well, we've had child trafficking laws on the books for a long time, and child trafficking has been increasing, including the reports to the United Nations. We're not doing our job to protect against child trafficking. And let's be clear. As far as I know, you can't email a child to somebody else. The child trafficking is largely happening over physical mechanisms. Children are ending up in trucks and cars. They're coming across borders which are too porous. The rules and laws we have in place to protect child trafficking aren't working today. Using laws to regulate behavior on the internet, given the children are not delivered over the internet, once again seems to be a false argument, because it simply won't work, because it's really not working now. David Smith mentioned safe zones around schools as an example. Well, the United States has safe zones around a lot of schools, and school shootings have been going up for them over time, not down. The idea of safe zones around schools just fundamentally didn't work. He mentioned that the last election, the one that his party won, had tremendous disinformation going around it. It was horrible. But what is that disinformation? Was that disinformation that talked about my party's positions? Was that the disinformation he talked about? Because clearly they won. And if you look at what happened in the United States, they had a president that was in office that started talking about a corrupted election before the election even happened. That was just amazing. He's set up to try to keep himself in power by trying to control the information that was out there with regard to the effectiveness of the election. That showcases exactly how a party in power can abuse that power to try to hold on to that power long term. And clearly we've seen that happen in other countries like Russia and China, where disinformation being used by the party in power and the restriction of information by the challenging parties, to the point where challenging parties are put in jail and in prison or killed, is extreme. We cannot trust, whether it's my party in power or their party in power. No party should have the power to control the information that is shared, because power corrupts, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And this is just a power that neither one of us would manage well. And we can point to this simply by saying that the laws that we have in place today are not being regularly enforced, whether it's on the internet or not. And let's be clear, once again, we are not arguing to not enforce the laws we have today on the internet. We are arguing against additional laws that could restrict free speech, that could restrict our entrepreneurs, that could restrict our businesses, could restrict our economy, and could reduce the protections against our freedoms and particularly our freedom to choose our own government. We need to be judicious here. We need to make sure the laws we have in place are in fact enforced regardless of the medium. But we don't need to put in place other laws that might allow one party, my party or his party, to take absolute control over our communications medium, and once again make problems that we have worse, not better. Using the examples of vaccine mandates as a example of what happens when you try to mandate something instead of educating the populace effectively on what it is they should do. We should be telling our people and helping our people become better users of the internet, not be putting in place a set of restrictive laws that we not only can't enforce evenly, but might create a significant drag on our ability to grow our economy, grow our business, and ensure the freedoms of our people today and for tomorrow.
Thank you, Honorable Opposition Leader of the Parliament, for your excellent closing remarks. Now I request Honorable Member of the Government side for the closing remarks, Professor Donald.
Rob just made our argument for us. He was just saying that regulation was beneficial. So we had regulations and we needed to enforce them. I mean, I agree with Rob 100%. I think that what people have been discussing here is I want to close with pointing out that the internet is a number of layers. And at the very, very top layer, there's the pictures and speech and things that we talk about. But underneath, the data has to get from one place to another. The information has to flow over networks. And one regulation that we have in the United States is called net neutrality, and it's been adopted in most of the world. And what that means is that your data can go over a different company's network. You can initialize it at Comcast, and it can go through AT&T, and they can't charge or restrict for that. So if that went away, then it would be a competition between corporations to see who could basically bleed us for the most amount of money. And you could ostensibly have different prices for your traffic depending on how many networks it went through, and all kinds of really grim things. So that's an example of a way that regulation is critical to keep the internet going and keep the internet free and available for us. And I want to just, kind of close talking about the higher level stuff. Rob just was talking about us being able to not inform our populace. And part of that has to do with a huge industry on the internet whose whole goal is to confuse people and to create negative. So, for instance, there's huge anti-vax people. There's a guy named Joe Rogan who I've never listened to, but he has a podcast that does nothing but spew out misinformation about. Interestingly enough, there's a little bit of like free market regulation here because a musician named Neil Young said, as long as Spotify has Joe Rogan on it, I'm taking my stuff off. And this went around Twitter and everywhere, and so many people have canceled their Spotify conditions that their stock has gone down 5% in one day. And the point of the matter is we can block traffic that's deliberate disinformation. There's another person named Tucker Carlson in the United States who is basically using his thing to support Russia. So basically saying that Russia has the right to take over Ukraine. Ukraine is a Russian colony. Ukraine is an ally of the United States. I mean, that's actually sedition. And so when we talked about enforcing the laws, the amount that we're spending on enforcing it is minuscule. I just was looking it up, and it's something like 0.7% of our defense budget. It's nothing. So we could definitely spend more money, in the United States, it's 0.7% of their defense budget. So any country can allocate the resources. They're not willing to do it. I don't have anything against porn personally. I mean, there's people who they call themselves sex positive. They might want their kids to grow up watching porn. That doesn't bother me. But when people are doing disinformation that's killing people, like anti-vax information, then I think that we, at that level, also have an obligation to be able to regulate that. And again, as somebody else pointed out, copyright violations are already regulated. If you start downloading somebody's music that's been copied from Comcast, they'll send you a note. And who is it that has to search for that? It's the companies. And the regulation is companies have to look for this. And all of this could be done because the internet traffic has to go through Comcast and AT&T and things like that. It's perfectly possible to filter these and stop these. So it's absolutely harming our society. The helpful part is the net neutrality and other ways to have the data be free. The hard part is that people are using it to deliberately destroy countries on purpose, and we need to stop that. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Thank you, everyone. This is actually mock parliament, but we try to create some awareness with our debate, with our open dialogue. This is actually part of our summit. We are working with IEEE this year. We have a plan to arrange a scientific conference in Asia Pacific, and definitely all of our speakers from around the world, they will join and they will attend in our scientific conference. They will attend in the debate. And we also already we are working with different country, different government, different corporation, different academy, and they will join in our conference. And beside that, I just want to share, because debating is extremely important for developing nations as well. Especially it helps to improve the analytical skills. We are just creating some good example. I think our student, those who are our audience, because we share hundred of universities group in the social media for developed world and for the developing worlds. I request all of our students, you can learn from our speakers how they analyze the things, how they analyze the whole process, because this is important for your career, this is important for your developments. And beside that, I believe that even our parliaments, we should do some proper practice of debate. And we wish to invite different parliament member from different countries, because the more you go for open dialogue and more debate, you can understand each other's, and you can go for proper collaborations. This is World Talent Economy Forum's objective. And by this debate, actually this week we finish our summit, Talent Economy Summit. So hopefully we will arrange more interesting sessions. And I'm happy that I want to share with our speakers, with our audience, that we are getting very good support from around the world. Many organizations, many kings, they ask me that we want to develop university, come and join with us. Many government, they ask me that, okay, come and join and collaborate with us. We need this kind of advanced university. Even Japan government, their B Lab with universities, they are also collaborate with us, and their target is bringing 1 million researchers. So many organization, research organization, academy, government body, they are collaborate with us, and we need more of your support, because the more you support us, we can go for more collaborations. Side by side, our students also increasing. We have our School of Talent Economy for India, especially with the grassroots level people. We are working with more than 3,200 students. From Africa, there is around 600 students. So we want to develop a better communities. And definitely we need your support. Those who want to join in our team, support our team, I want to welcome everyone. And side by side, I want to give special thanks to all of our speakers, those who always support World Talent Economy Forum, open dialogue, debatings, and any kind of initiative. Thank you, Mr. Marshall, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, Mr. Adam, and Professor Donald for your continuous support. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, with your corporation, and with academy. Hopefully, through this process, we can solve many problems of the developing world. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.